We can clearly say, based on radar data, which are empirical, not anecdotal, that these objects have been tracked since the early 1950s, if not earlier, traveling up to 7,000 miles per hour, making right-angle turns at high rates of speed, instantaneously hovering, reversing course.
What is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin.
Our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
What I can see of the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor. At least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder.
Metal casing is definitely extraterrestrial.
Just a minute. Something's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this is terrific. The top is beginning to rotate like a screw, and this thing must be hollow. Move it! Keep those men back! Keep those idiots back! They're turning into flames. He is caught by the wood, the fires, the gas tanks, the automobiles, spreading everywhere. Coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just been handed a message that came in from Grover's Mill by telephone. Just one moment, please. At least 40 people, including 6 state troopers, lie dead in a field east of the village of Grover's Mill. Their bodies burned and distorted beyond all possible recognition.
The creature, a Martian, effortlessly slips back into his machine and reappears controlling a huge 3-legged vehicle, armed with a death ray which effortlessly disposes of some 7,000 armed soldiers. The Secretary of the Interior then addresses the nation.
Citizens of the nation, we must confront this destructive adversary with a nation united, courageous, and consecrated to the preservation of human supremacy on this earth.
The government was powerless, or at least that's what millions of Americans believed. But it was a hoax, a radio dramatization by world-renowned actor Orson Welles, based upon science fiction writer H.G. Wells' book, The War of the Worlds. At the time, mass hysteria ensued across the country.
At the time you were giving this role, were you aware that terror was going on throughout the nation?
Oh, no, of course not. I am terribly shocked by the effect it's had. I do not believe that the method is original with me or peculiar to the Mercury Theater's presentation.
I love a good science fiction story just like anybody else. I even played the father of an alien, Superman, in the television series Smallville. For generations, people have seen objects in the sky that defied normal comprehension, and the UFO phenomenon, with its spectacular claims, remains one of the most enduring mysteries of our age. In the movie you're about to watch, we're going to look at how this phenomenon developed over the ages, and hopefully see what's behind it. We've interviewed scientists, researchers, and even individuals who claim that they have had experiences with strange entities. I think you're going to find that the truth is more surprising than most people realize. Gary Bates has been researching the UFO phenomenon for many years. He's spoken hundreds of times on the subject to various groups, including many TV and radio appearances all around the world. He investigated the events surrounding the War of the Worlds radio panic in his Amazon best-selling book, Alien Intrusion, UFOs and the Evolution Connection.
Now, for people listening to this radio broadcast, there was a type of suspension of disbelief. Even back in 1938, it seems that very few doubted what they were hearing. And many today probably don't realize that belief in life on other worlds was already popular. Back in 1905, amateur astronomer Percival Lowell wrongly concluded that water was flowing down from the ice caps of Mars into canals that had been constructed by intelligent beings. And before long, life on Mars was generally accepted. For example, a public symposium was held in 1928 called Eminent Astronomers Give Their Reasons for the Belief that Life Exists on the Great Red Planet. And yet all of this was based on a wildly speculative and unfounded hypothesis with zero data to back it up. Now, long before radio, Jules Verne became kind of the world's first global media superstar, and he was one of the first to try to incorporate scientific accuracy into his fictional writings. Now, this is important to note because this is the popular allure of science fiction itself. It's the ability to blend fiction with science to stir the imagination and ponder, what might be possible in the future.
Famous science fiction authors like Wells, Verne, Asimov, Frank Herbert, Arthur C. Clarke, and many others had a much greater impact on popular culture than most people even realize. Many of them foresaw some of the technological marvels we take for granted today. Verne proposed the idea of traveling from Earth to the moon in one of his novels. In The War of the Worlds, Wells envisioned lasers. And Arthur C. Clarke, whose book The Sentinel was the inspiration for the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, predicted satellites in orbit to relay electronic communications around the globe.
Now, I like sci-fi. I've seen every single episode of Star Trek and Star Wars. Some of the concepts might make us think about what's possible in the future. But if there's one problem with sci-fi, is that it blurs between what's fiction and what's science fact. And most science fiction today invokes the idea there are vast numbers of highly evolved, advanced aliens populating our universe. And what underpins this idea is the acceptance of the Big Bang theory of cosmic evolution as scientific fact.
So let's take this a step further. If life evolved on Earth, it's assumed it would have evolved multiple times, maybe even millions of times over in a billions of years old universe. Therefore, if some alien race were 1 million years older than us on an evolutionary scale, they might be 1 million years more technologically advanced than we are. And that leads people to believe that these allegedly advanced aliens, they're building hyperdrive and warp speed starships and they're capable of visiting the Earth, even though that's not possible according to what we now know about physics. Faster than light travel is yet another science fiction concept built upon a primary fictional concept called the Big Bang. And the big problem for those who believe in alien life is that even if they're out there, how would we even observe them? And how would they get here for that matter? I mean, the universe is such a massive place, the distances are literally astronomical.
The grand scheme of the evolutionary history of life, not only here on Earth, but allegedly everywhere in the universe, goes like this. In the beginning, there was nothing. Nothing means nothing. That means no empty space, no planets, no matter, not a quantum vacuum. Even time itself did not exist. In the current, most popular view of the origin of time and space, in other words, the universe, something called a singularity appeared for no cause and no reason. The laws of physics break down. The Big Bangers have their own supernatural origin. Now, this microscopic entity with infinite density contained all the matter, space, and energy of what was to become our universe. Somehow this exploded in what the famous astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle derisively called the Big Bang. Now, quantum physics is actually a field I studied for my PhD. This is real science, but the Big Bang belief of the origin of the universe is not demonstrable science. In fact, it actually violates a scientific law known as the law of causality. Think about it this way. Number one, everything which has a beginning has a cause. Number two, the universe has a beginning. 3. Therefore, the universe or the Big Bang must have a cause. So, at some stage in the past, to have a beginning, it must have been wound up. However, the Big Bang asserts without evidence that the universe began to exist without a cause. This is both beyond the laws of real physics and contrary to the law of causality. Now, here's the key point. This Big Bang belief is central to the idea of alien life populating our universe. No Big Bang, no alien life.
The idea that UFOs are spacecraft piloted by older, more advanced aliens is known as the extraterrestrial hypothesis. These beliefs are no small thing. Ufology is becoming the most widely accepted scientific religion and has led to the proliferation of some major cults founded upon this belief, like Scientology. In 1997, a CNN Time magazine poll found, among other things, that 80% believe the government is hiding the existence of extraterrestrial life forms. 64% believe aliens have contacted humans. 50% believe that aliens have abducted humans. And 75% believe that a UFO crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. Beliefs in UFOs and ET life have become mainstream beliefs.
Now, these religious concepts have become the basis for most modern science fiction. Consider the Star Wars franchise with its good versus evil concepts, its messianic and redemptive themes. It inadvertently parallels the biblical narrative in many ways. You know, one of the early inspirational movies was the original 1951 classic, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Now, the main characters were actually a parody of biblical figures. It's a little difficult for today's generation to comprehend the world's mood in the post-Second World War period. But the Cold War powers were already playing brinksmanship, you know, kind of trying to one-up each other. And the threat of nuclear war was just on the horizon.
A humanoid alien called Klaatu is sent to Earth as a representative of the Intergalactic Council to warn Earth's occupants about encroaching upon all the other peaceful alien civilizations with our newly found nuclear weapons. He places a robot, Gort, as an advanced super policeman to rule over human beings should they threaten other races beyond their own planet.
Now we see that the alien threat canvasses the idea that we were going to be governed by a more evolved and advanced race. And this really played into the Cold War hysteria of the day.
The threat of aggression by any group, anywhere, can no longer be tolerated. There must be security for all, or no one is secure. Your choice is simple. Join us and live in peace, or pursue your present course and face obliteration. We shall be waiting for your answer. The decision rests with you.
The alien Klaatu went to live among humans to understand more about them, and he took the name Carpenter. Jesus was a carpenter, but he was killed by this aggressive and less evolved species who did not really understand his peaceful mission. And when Klaatu was returned to his spaceship, his lifeless body was resurrected by the robot Gort, harnessing the power of the Almighty Spirit.
Hello?
I thought you were...
I was.
He has the power of life and death?
No. That power is reserved to the Almighty Spirit.
The scriptwriter Edmund North actually commented on these similarities.
It was my private little joke. I never discussed this angle. I hoped the Christ comparison would be subliminal.
Belief in extraterrestrial life has influenced virtually all aspects of our society. Even presidents openly discuss such things on TV talk shows.
Think of how all the differences among people on Earth would seem small if we felt threatened by a space invader. That's the whole theory of independence.
You're right.
Everybody gets together and makes nice and, you know.
You and Bill O'Reilly would be hiding in a bunker together.
In our obsession with antagonisms of the moment, we often forget how much unites all the members of humanity. Perhaps we need some outside universal threat to make us recognize this common bound. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
It was the darndest thing I've ever seen. It was big, it changed colors, and it was about the size of the moon. We watched it for 10 minutes, but none of us could figure out what it was. One thing's for sure, I'll never make fun of people who say they've seen unidentified flying objects in the sky. If I become president, I'll make every piece of information this country has about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists. I'm convinced that UFOs exist because I've seen one.
Because these beliefs are mainstream, when many people see an object in the sky that they don't recognize, that is, a UFO, they automatically assume it's a space vehicle from another planet and call in a UFO sighting.
Has there been a shift even in the scientific community or in the more serious observers of these things in their understanding of what's going on?
Absolutely. I think particularly in the 50s and the 60s, again, as our understanding about the universe grew, at the same time there seemed to be an explosion of UFO sightings. In fact, 1947 was a very, very defining event. A man named Kenneth Arnold was flying his light plane over Mount Rainier in Washington, and he said he saw 9 shaped discs following his aircraft. And he said they looked like saucers skipping across the water. And that is actually the genesis of the term flying saucer, where it came from.
So before 1947, the talk of flying saucers as such was nowhere near so.
Not flying saucers, but UFOs were still common. There was an airship wave in the 1896, 1898, and what it appears is that UFOs seem to appear within the understanding of the culture of the time. UFOs in the 1800s appeared like airships. The ancient Romans and Greeks have stories of flying shields with occupants on board. American Indians have legends of flying canoes with people on board. And as we approached our rocket age, if you like, we started to take on these silvery, shiny types of shapes.
The world's largest group when it comes to investigating UFO sightings and experiences is the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON.
MUFON is a scientific research organization whose goals are to investigate UFO sightings, conduct and promote research into the UFO subject, and to educate the public on their findings.
For over 20 years, Joe Jordan has been investigating UFOs for MUFON and is currently their national director for South Korea. He's also part of MUFON's International Rapid Response STAR team of UFO investigative researchers. Joe's research into UFOs and the alien abduction phenomenon has been shared in over 20 publications by other UFO researchers.
You know, as far back as 1991, we had a Roper poll that was initiated by ufologists that actually claimed that 20 million Americans had seen a UFO, and up to 4 million had been abducted by aliens. I may not agree with those figures completely, but I have interviewed hundreds of people, and they have seen things that they cannot explain.
When Spielberg made his movie, the
Close Encounters, he actually had ufologists or whatever advising him on how that all worked. Yeah. Well, the lead character in the movie was a Frenchman. I think the character's name was Lacombe, but it was based upon a real ufologist by the name of Jacques Vallée. And he was a contemporary of another gentleman called Dr. J. Allen Hynek. They're both physical scientists. And those two gentlemen were collaborators. And the movie was actually based around, you know, sort of their research and the mysterious things that they'd found out. In fact, Hynek, even more interestingly, was a government researcher under a project called Blue Book. The US government has investigated UFOs for over 40 years in different projects. And he found that, you know, the majority could be explained naturally or as either man-made phenomena, but he said there was a mysterious element that defied naturalistic explanation. These craft have been seen to change shapes. They defy the laws of physics. You know, American fighter pilots have gone up seen these balls of light and shot at them, and they've disappeared before their eyes. They've disappeared off radar screen. So as a physical scientist, he said, well, there's a mystery there that I need to solve.
Hynek later became frustrated with the government's attempt to make every sighting explainable via natural phenomenon, when it simply wasn't the case.
In my association with Project Blue Book, they never would notify the media when an interesting case came up. They did everything they could to keep it down. So they definitely withheld information. There are three things about this whole thing no one can deny. They're incontrovertible points. Even the grossest skeptic can't deny them. First of all, is that the UFO reports not only exist but persist. See, when I started with the Air Force, I thought that this was a fad. In a few years, it would just disappear.
Be all over, okay.
And it's global. We have reports now from 140 countries. I mean, practically as many countries as there are in the United Nations. And the most important of the three things is that many, unfortunately not all, but many of the reports come from highly, highly credible, technically trained people, you see.
Hynek's contemporary was French astronomer and computer scientist Dr. Jacques Vallée. They became friends and collaborators, and even appeared before the United Nations to deliver their findings on UFOs.
I met Steven Spielberg. He was about halfway through filming Close Encounters, and we had a long discussion about what UFOs could be. And of course, for him, the main point of the movie was entertainment, and it was appropriate for the UFOs to be extraterrestrial visitors. I think that from my own point of view, I'm going to be very disappointed if UFOs turn out to be nothing more than visitors from another planet, because I think they could be something much more interesting.
I suppose one's natural response is to debunk or ridicule something you don't understand or invoke some pathological explanation. But you know, when I think about scientists like Hynek and Vallée, for example, it would have been a lot easier for them to write it off as cranks and hoaxes and psychological delusions, because they wouldn't have risked the wrath of their fellow scientists. But you know, they were honest and they knew it wasn't deserved. And so I suppose my approach is that I've learned to extend kind of empathy or a listening ear to these experiences, because really they're actually victims. And as a result, they've undergone a total transformation of their worldview. In short, it's become a life-changing experience for them.
Over the years, there have been numerous disclosure conferences held at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. On each occasion, large numbers of ex-U.S. Air Force and other military officers, sometimes 80 or more, gave personal testimonies regarding their own UFO sightings.
Unknown aerial objects have in fact been observed over many of our nuclear weapons bases and other nuclear facilities, and in some cases the appearance of these objects coincided with compromising the operational readiness of our nuclear weapons.
There were 3 or 4 objects in the north, brightly colored, changing from elliptical to round and moving at very high speed and sharp angular movements as though they were doing a grid search.
We can clearly say, based on radar data, which are empirical, not anecdotal, that these objects have been tracked since the early 1950s, if not earlier, traveling up to 7,000 miles per hour, making right-angle turns at high rates of speed, instantaneously hovering, reversing course. If we or the Russians or any country on Earth had those kinds of craft in the early 50s, why have we spent the last several decades developing fixed-wing aircraft of far inferior abilities? These are clearly, in my view, a technology from somewhere else piloted by beings from obviously another world or another dimension.
Now, Hynek and Vallée and many others who've investigated the UFO phenomenon don't necessarily believe these are alien spacecraft. In fact, they came to the conclusion it was something much stranger and most likely interdimensional.
The evidence is overwhelming that people from all over the world and all walks of life have seen unidentified flying objects, with most believing that these are spaceships from another planet or another star system. But is it even feasible for aliens to traverse trillions of kilometers across the heavens in faster than light vehicles? Dr. Henry L. Richter is a former rocket scientist from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He helped develop and pioneer many of America's first space successes, such as Explorer 1, America's first satellite in space, and the Ranger, Mariner, and Surveyor programs.
I've been involved in the development of space vehicles for exploration for over 60 years. You know, there are massive problems with the idea that advanced aliens can simply warp themselves around the galaxy, jump into hyperspace, or use wormholes, etc.
The nearest star to our own sun is Proxima Centauri, which is about 4.4 light years from Earth. That's about 45 trillion kilometers away. Our own sun is 150 million kilometers from the Earth by comparison. So even if you could travel at the speed of light, it would take you 2.5 million years to reach the closest galaxy, which is Andromeda. That's over 500,000 times further away than Proxima Centauri.
There is a tyranny of distance in space if one wants to explore other worlds or star systems. Einstein theorized that the maximum speed possible could only ever be the speed of light. This is because as our speed increases, our mass also increases until at the speed of light, our mass becomes infinite. Although one is weightless in space, the same laws of physics apply out there as they do on Earth.
Imagine a very small spacecraft, only 1 ton or 2,200 pounds. How much energy would it take to reach just a third the speed of light, or 100,000 kilometers per second? Simple physics shows that it would need a huge amount of energy. How huge? Twice as much as the total energy produced worldwide by all nuclear testing and combat combined. And when you get to your destination, you need the same amount of energy to slow it down. Then when you want to return home, it has to be accelerated and slowed down again. Every round trip requires a fourfold input of this enormous amount of energy. And this is just for a tiny craft, not the Enterprise or the huge ships in Independence Day.
Now, the Surveyor spacecraft that my team and I worked on actually landed on the moon, which paved the way for the later Apollo missions.
Burn your ignition. Retro is now firing. Ignition looks stable. Falling steadily.
And yet, at the best speed of those enormous Apollo craft, which took 3 days to reach our moon, it would take 870,000 years to reach Proxima Centauri, the nearest star out from our own sun.
Space is an incredibly hostile environment. It is estimated that there are 100,000 dust particles per cubic kilometer of space. For example, when the Space Shuttle Challenger hit a small paint flake in 1983, the impact energy was so great that it gouged a crater in the front window. These windows were designed to be extremely robust.
The Hubble Space Telescope already has several holes in its structure after just 12 years circling the Earth, traveling at about 1/10,000th of the speed required for galactic travel.
Note that the energy is proportional to the square of the speed, so our hypothetical 1/3 light speed craft would suffer 100 million times the energy damage of the Hubble for a given impact. So even a grain as light as a snowflake would be like a pinpoint explosion of 4 tons of TNT. An object with the mass of a raisin would result in an impact with the energy equivalents of 80 Hiroshima atomic bombs.
Now, science fiction such as Star Trek has invented concepts such as force fields, deflector arrays, and shields to deal with these problems. Now, some electrically charged objects can be deflected using electromagnetic fields, but here we're talking about withstanding energy impacts totaling multiple atomic bombs. This remains purely in the realms of science fiction, because the same equally powerful and opposing force would have to be generated to deflect such objects.
The travel distance problem. It's the single greatest problem for both science fiction writers and believers in the extraterrestrial hypothesis. It's the idea that advanced aliens could be traversing space within their own lifetimes. Now, people might say, you can't say it's impossible. I mean, we don't know what technologies will be invented in the future. And that's true, we don't. But the requirements being spoken for galactic, faster-than-light travel require a violation of the laws of physics that govern our universe. I mean, you can't build anti-gravity spacecraft, for instance. You simply can't switch off gravity. You can only build more and more powerful craft to escape gravity. But once you do that, you create a whole bunch of other problems. There's another problem for the extraterrestrial hypothesis that has aliens visiting us from a galaxy far, far away, and that is, did life evolve on Earth by chance? And if it did, would that evolution occur millions of times over elsewhere in our universe?
The idea that some simple life first formed in some primordial swamp on Earth about 3 billion years ago is known as chemical evolution or abiogenesis. And because it happened here, they reason it must have happened on billions of other planets in the universe. However, just as cosmic evolution is anti-scientific, so is the claim that biological life can come about by chance, random processes. Now, all living creatures require vast amounts of coded information. Even the simplest self-reproducing cell has about 600 kilobytes of information in its DNA. And this must be highly compressed. To simulate what it does during reproduction took over 100 powerful computers running for 10 hours. Even the popular atheist astronomer Paul Davies noted, how did stupid atoms spontaneously write their own software? Nobody knows. There is no known law of physics able to create information from nothing.
But in order to avoid the idea of a designer, many people have looked elsewhere for answers to these questions. Some have suggested that life on Earth could have arrived by chance from another planet and floated to Earth in some icy comet or meteorite. This is known as panspermia, or almost literally, seeds from space everywhere. But how could organic life survive the incredibly harsh environment of space when there's no oxygen, there's below freezing temperatures, there's harmful radiation, and then just happen to be captured by Earth's gravity as it flew past at tens of thousands of miles an hour and somehow avoided being burned up as it entered the Earth's atmosphere like 48 kilometers per second, and then survived smashing into the planet at supersonic speeds that are fast enough to melt the very ground on impact? It was problems like this that prompted the atheist astronomer and Big Bang critic Sir Fred Hoyle to say, "There's also not the slightest trace that any primeval soup ever existed on Earth, let alone any other planet. If the beginnings of life were not random, they must therefore have been the product of purposeful intelligence. It is big enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution."
Francis Crick, the primary discoverer of DNA, is one of those scientists who realize it can't happen spontaneously. So he, like other scientists, are imagining that intelligent life from outer space brought life to Earth. And they find that more credible than the idea of spontaneous origin of life.
But directed panspermia doesn't actually solve anything. It has the same problems as the undirected variety, and that is, how did life start? It just pushes the origin of life problem off into outer space where we can't actually test it. And if aliens created life on Earth, then who were the creators of those aliens? And then who created the aliens that created life on Earth? You can't go back forever because this Big Bang is supposed to have happened in the finite past. And since it just invokes more unscientific ideas to solve those original unscientific ideas, it's no wonder ufology has been called a substitute religion.
Research has shown that people who are not affiliated with any church but who claim that they are religious are particularly susceptible to the possible existence of extraterrestrials. For them, ufology is a substitute religion.
In the 1950s, Nobel Prize winner and pioneer of atomic energy, Enrico Fermi, while working at the Los Alamos nuclear facility in New Mexico, raised some straightforward questions. Are we the only advanced civilization in the entire universe? And if we are not, then where are they? Why haven't we seen any traces of extraterrestrial life, such as probes or transmissions? Why haven't we found their artifacts on Earth or in our solar system?
Fermi, not unreasonably, based upon his evolutionary assumptions, also suggested that intelligent aliens will be curious explorers just like us, and in a 14 billion-year-old universe, there should have been plenty of time for at least the very first advanced races to send starships to colonize other planets. Even if it took millions of years for each colonizing effort, the new colony once established and the original civilization could each send out another expedition to colonize other planets, doubling the number of new colonies every million years. After 10 million years, there'd be over 1,000 alien colonies, and after 20 million years, there'd be 1 million. At that rate, at 40 million years, there'd be 1 trillion civilizations. After 14 billion years, the number of alien civilizations in the universe would be tripping over each other. That's called the Fermi paradox. Or in short, where is everybody?
Well, it is not for the lack of searching. For over 50 years, and via 60 different projects, they've been scanning the universe at a rate of millions of radio frequencies every second, yet they've never eavesdropped even once on ET phoning home in all that time.
UFO researcher Guy Malone has lived and worked in Roswell, New Mexico for many years. He's organized numerous conferences there, bringing together the world's leading UFO investigators and researchers. His first book on the UFO phenomenon is called Come Sail Away With Me.
In 1947, many believed that a flying saucer containing alien bodies crashed just outside of Roswell, and that the U.S. government has been covering it up ever since. But just outside of town, there's even a headstone, a grave marker on Mac Brazel's farm where he supposedly discovered some debris.
The inscription on the monument reads, "We don't know who they were. We don't know why they came. We only know they changed our view of the universe. This universal sacred site is dedicated, July 1997, to the beings who met their destinies near Roswell, New Mexico, July 1947.
Roswell is the holy grail for UFO believers. Every July 4th weekend, the town about doubles in size as people come from all over the world just looking for meaning and purpose. believing that older, wiser aliens are going to provide us with the answers they're looking for.
You know, I have had the privilege of being a pastor here in Roswell now for 22 years, and it's been an amazing experience. I mean, I love the town, I love the people. You know, one of the interesting things about being here in Roswell is it's kind of a conservative town, and so the whole idea of UFOs is not something we talk about consistently. But because of where we live, every time we travel, every time we're on the phone, and we, you know, give our address, we live in Roswell, New Mexico, it's almost immediately a response. And someone goes, is that like the Roswell where the UFO crashed? And, you know, the number of people that come here to Roswell is amazing. They come from all across the United States. We see license plates from every state in the Union, and then people from around the world, you know, travel here. They come for lots of reasons. Some people come just for curiosity. It's just fun. But then we have people that come and their whole life is affected by this. They have looked at things, either they had an experience themselves or somebody they loved had an experience, or they saw something, and so they're coming to our little town, which is crazy, from around the world to answer some of these huge questions, and they're wondering if aliens might be the answer to those questions.
Well, all religions, like Christianity, seek to answer the three big questions. You know what they are. First one, where do we come from? Are we created or are we evolved? But in the case of the UFO phenomenon, perhaps we were created by aliens, right?
I haven't seen that one before. That's obviously a take on creation of Adam in the Sistine Chapel. There's the hand of man reaching up to touch the hand of our alien creators, as many believe. Wow. If you ever wanted an example where ufology's become a substitute religion, I'll tell you what, 20, 30 years ago, you couldn't have done that.
Number two is, why are we here? What's our meaning and purpose in life? Well, remember earlier I said that people are often changed, their lives are changed after this alleged alien encounter. And of course the third one is, what happens to us when we die? Well, if there's no God, we're just dead, that's it. No life after death. But again, the UFO believers, they think that aliens are going to take us away or change the earth into some utopian paradise, for example. And they come up with ideas about, you know, fixing holes in our ozone layer and saving us from global warming, the common themes. But they even claim they can raise the dead. So I've had people challenge me and say, well, you know, Jesus was just an advanced alien mistaken for God, and that's how he could perform what appeared to be miracles at the time. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not ridiculing, but it's important to note these are the types of stories that are given to people who have this alleged alien encounter. In other words, it's forming the answer to those three questions and therefore the basis of their worldview. And they're the key to interpreting what's happening in this whole UFO phenomenon.
I've worked in Roswell a lot over the years. Unquestionably, there have been more books and movies made about Roswell than any other UFO topic. Yet what happened there is really quite benign. Let's remember, this was the 1940s, long before there were satellites in the atmosphere. And due to the curvature of the Earth, there was a line of sight problem when it came to listening to radio transmissions or watching activities by other countries. So the government sent up some unusually covered, supposedly disguised, high-altitude weather balloons to be carried by the jet streams over the Soviet Union. These balloons were carrying acoustic listening devices with the aim of trying to listen to the Soviets' above-ground atomic tests. When one crashed in Roswell, the government didn't want anyone to know what they were doing, particularly the Soviets. It was called Project Mogul.
You know, it really was that simple. People find it hard to believe, but it was the mayhem surrounding the cover-up that created what's being called the Roswell incident. So here you can see that they're claiming that these symbols on the wreckage were of unknown origin, but in fact the boxes underneath the balloons that held the acoustic listening devices were held together by tape from a toy company, and these are actually just symbols that were on the tape.
Roswell is now big business, and the town survives on its alien reputation. So they don't want the facts to get in the way of a good story.
Check this out. So
Only in Roswell could you get something like this. This is a giant inflatable grey, even though he's coloured green, outside of a major car dealership. So even international corporations here in town have no problem in linking themselves with this alien theme. It's quite remarkable, isn't it?
Now, if you walk through the Roswell UFO Museum, for example, you'll see displays showing supposedly classified information, but most of it has been very simply explained.
Look, it's all too easy to be a debunker, and I don't want to do that. Area 51 is a secret base, for example. And of course governments keep secrets. They've developed all sorts of secret weapons there, like stealth technology and so on, but not lasers harvested from the Roswell alien spaceship.
Over the years, there have been 3 separate official investigations, and even presidents have reviewed documents surrounding the Roswell incident.
So I had all the Roswell papers reviewed, everything.
If you saw that there were aliens there, would you tell us?
Yeah.
You would?
I would. But if we were visited someday, I wouldn't be surprised. I just hope that it's not like Independence Day.
But we need to keep in mind, for the UFO believer, he or she wants you to believe what they believe. But as an experienced investigator, however, these are the facts. Consistently, around 90 to 95% of UFOs are explainable as natural or man-made phenomena. For example, there's lenticular clouds, there's ball lightning, flocks of birds, aircraft, satellites, and so on. Even the planet Venus, which is seen early in the night sky, accounts for around 25% of all UFO sightings.
The reality is that one already believes something before you ever look at facts or data. It's a kind of pre-belief. Let me give you an example. Imagine 200 years ago, right? Someone's in their field and they saw something in the sky flying around they didn't understand. You know, they wouldn't dream of it being a spaceship from another planet. They would interpret it within their kind of cultural understanding of the day, the lenses they're wearing. They might think it's a demon or an angel. But think about today, you know, someone looks up and sees something in the sky they don't understand and they go, wow, look, it's a UFO. But UFO today doesn't mean unidentified flying object. It means a spaceship piloted by aliens. See, we mistake what we see. And that's because it's just lay people looking up at them. They don't know what they're looking at.
Most UFO sightings can be explained as natural or man-made phenomena. We might explain more if we had access to the facts at the time, which we didn't in the case of Roswell. But there is always a small percentage that gives researchers a really hard time. They're seen to fly at incredible speeds. They appear and disappear from radar, and they're seen merging into one another. One of the most famous of these was the Washington UFOs.
In 1952, objects seen on radar flying in formation buzzed the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C. Recorded on 3 separate radar installations, including Washington's National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base. There were 2 separate sightings over 2 weeks, resulting in the dispatch of F-94 interceptor jets. A subsequent press conference resulted in the largest attendance of media since World War II.
We can say that the recent sightings are in no way connected with any secret development by any department of the United States. What is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin.
In 1952, I was an enlisted man covering the Washington, D.C. area in case the Russians come over the North Pole. This particular night, we had an alert. It was bogies were in the area. They were showing up on radar. We were given plots to start trying to track them and lock on them. They were flying a pattern where they come over our gun battery and over the Washington Monument and over Andrews Air Force Base. Sometimes they went at extremely high speed. We're used to tracking airplanes, so we know what they look like. These things look like nothing we'd ever seen before.
I don't think we can do things like that we saw now. I don't think they can do it. It's just too fast. It stopped too quick. You turn into a big blob and then turn into a bunch of little ones. Too fast. Our commanders and all told us, just keep your mouth shut about it. We can't say it did or it didn't. So for 64 years, I've been trying to explain what we saw. And you're the first guys that really want to know what I saw. I know there was something there. There was not just a swamp gas or inversion, temperature inversion or mistaking the radar. There was something there.
The Washington UFOs remain a good example of, kind of one of the small percentage of sightings that defy naturalistic interpretations and still remains unsolved to this day. But what else would you expect the government to say? Particularly when something unknown has just buzzed the president's backyard.
Dr. J. Allen Hynek also developed a classification system for UFO experiences that was used in the classic movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah, I was very influenced by J. Allen Hynek because he was not looking at UFOs as science fiction, but he was looking at them as science speculation. He found the witness reports very credible, and he found so many similarities from so many portions of America as well as throughout the world that he became a convert to the fact that the government was hiding something and something was afoot. He's even in the movie in a snippet of a scene in the third act.
Well, a close encounter of the first kind is one is close, but nothing really happens.
Forget the shape and forget how fast it's going. It's something that you just can't explain.
Close encounters of the second kind are those which leave a physical trace. Holes in the ground,
Burn rings,
broken tree branches,
telephone lines down,
animals disturbed,
the stopping of car engines.
Then the close encounters of the third kind are the most interesting of all.
Close encounter of the third kind is really when you meet them.
We should not underestimate the power of the media, film, visual images to transform and even shape popular culture. Although Hynek and Valley were physical scientists, they realized the study of UFOs involved something rather non-tangible.
We must wonder, too, where UFOs are hiding when not manifesting themselves to human eyes.
The conclusion I've come to after all these years is that, first of all, the subject is much more complex than any of us imagined. It has paranormal aspects, but certainly it has very real physical aspects too. If we are finally forced by the evidence itself to go into the paranormal, then we will. I'm very much afraid that UFOs are related to certain psychic phenomena.
Be skeptical wherever possible. Look for simple explanations and only go to the spiritual when the evidence demands it, not just because we don't know what's going on. That's what the experts like Hynek and Valley did, in some ways without realizing it.
The extraterrestrial hypothesis that as aliens visiting the Earth is based on Big Bang and life evolving all over the universe. Even if that did happen, real science shows they can't get here. So the devotees have come up with ideas that aliens are visiting us from parallel universes or a multiverse or something like that, which they feel fits the evidence of them seemingly flitting in and out of space at will. The most popular view today is something known as the interdimensional hypothesis.
But let's be absolutely clear here. See, multiverses and string theory don't have a single shred of observational data to go on. And if it's not observable, it's not testable. And if it's not testable, it's not real science. No, these are completely hypothetical ideas, and they resort to them as an alternative to a failing Big Bang theory. So they can still have some kind of naturalistic origin for our existence.
Altogether, I've written about 40 books. That covers UFOs, Bigfoot, the Chupacabra, Loch Ness Monster, conspiracy theories, kind of anything a little bit weird, I'll give it a try. When I first got interested in the UFO subject, it was very black and white for me. aliens were coming from star systems far away from ours. They were abducting people, they were taking DNA, and so on. But certainly by the time I was in my late 20s, my thoughts and concepts and ideas had changed greatly. By that point, I began to realize that some of these cases were just too strange to even be extraterrestrial. I would say I take far more like an interdimensional approach to the subject today. And many of my thoughts and ideas on the subject were driven by the late John Keel, most famous known for the Mothman Prophecies book. And Keel came to this conclusion as well, the idea that whatever the UFO phenomenon is, it coexists with us.
The UFOs do not seem to exist as tangible, manufactured objects. They do not conform to the natural laws of our environment. The thousands of contacts with the entities indicate they are liars and put-on artists. The UFO manifestations seem to be, by and large, merely minor variations of the age-old demonological phenomenon.
Well, I have been investigating the UFO phenomenon since around 1961. I have even been a member of UFO organizations such as NICAP and APRO, and I have interviewed hundreds of people who claim to have had amazing sightings, including those who claim to have been abducted. I have created a group called the Civilian Intelligence Network, whose aim was to find out if the government was behind the creation of certain types of craft that resembles a UFO, and I have never found any solid evidence for that. This phenomenon doesn't seem to appear from outer space, but rather they appear suddenly and they disappear or dematerialize, and gives us the impression that they are taking off as if using some kind of a propulsion system. And I don't think they are flying. They just disappear or dematerialize.
UFO experiences often have a profound effect on individuals. Hynek noted.
There has been a change of outlook, a change of philosophy of persons' lives. Many people, like Jacques Vallée and I, to some extent, feel that it might be a conditioning process.
Gary, you mentioned earlier that some of these sightings are, I think you referred to them as interdimensional, psychic, or spiritual in those categories. The question I have is, how can scientists test something like this?
Well, I actually feel there is an area that can give us insight, or if you like, we can test the source of this phenomenon. And that's what they call close encounters of the fourth kind, abductions. There have been specialist abduction researchers like John Mack, Bud Hopkins, David Jacobs, and even John Carpenter of MUFON, for example. And you know, they've interviewed independently and hypnotically regressed hundreds upon hundreds of experiences. And besides the fact that they found that all these events follow patterns that are very similar, strikingly similar to each other, it's looking at the information that's imparted to the experiences where we can actually test the claims of these alleged benevolent space brothers.
Dr. John Mack was a Pulitzer Prize-winning psychiatrist and author. Initially a skeptic about the alien abduction phenomenon, he ultimately became convinced that people were having experiences with something otherworldly.
Dr. Mack, what does this all mean? What is all of this, you know, the book where you talk to hundreds of patients and describe in detail what they say they have experienced, you with your credentials coming from Harvard, what do you think this all means?
So when I heard of it, hundreds of thousands of people all over the country, from various polls, we know maybe even millions of people have had very similar experiences. They don't know each other. The details that they're describing were not in the media. They have nothing to gain by it. They feel ashamed about it. That's number one. When I also heard that this was occurring in children as young as 2 or 3 years old, that ruled out personality explanations. It's associated with UFOs independently observed by witnesses, by media, by neighbors. It's also associated with physical findings and, as said before, the people, when examined, are not psychiatrically disturbed. So the only thing that behaves like that is real experience.
Yeah, you say that
Dreams
it's
do
trauma,
not behave.
trauma, that it's trauma.
It's traumatic.
Not, yeah.
Real experiences are the only thing that occurs like that. Psychosis isn't like that. Madness is not like that. Dreams are not like that. Fantasy is not like that. Now, if these are real experiences, what is going on?
The night that we saw what we call the UFO, we're driving home. We pulled up in our driveway and we noticed in the field behind the house these lights that were unusual. And it couldn't be farm machinery because all the crops had been harvested. It started moving. It didn't make a sound. It didn't stir a breeze, and it was completely silent. But it was somewhere between 50 and 75 feet. The lights on it were red. They were large red lights, and they pulsated in and out in a sequence. Could not see the craft. It was like it was stealth or something. We could just see the lights. It looked like a row of red lights. This thing navigated through power lines, over fences, until eventually it just ascended up to about treetop level, and it took off. It just vanished.
Dr. David Jacobs was an associate professor at Temple University, Pennsylvania, and is the only person to have obtained a PhD on a UFO-related topic. He found himself at odds with John Mack, who believed that UFO experiences could be viewed as positive, even spiritual experiences.
One thing that you have to understand in terms of traumatic experiences and how traumatic this is that the abduction phenomenon begins in infancy and goes to old age. And in fact, that has turned out to be true in virtually every case, that I've been able to look at.
Really, between ages about 4 and 8 or 9, I had multiple experiences with like little beings in my room sometimes. Sometimes I felt like I would be taken places, being held down, tormented. I knew they were evil. I knew that I didn't like them either, but there was just really nothing I could do to stop them. It was just part of my life for many years.
Several years ago, I'm not really sure how long ago it was, we were contacted to see if we would do this documentary. I think the first one was for sightings, and then we also did one for A&E, but they were basically on the same thing about our abduction experiences.
I was screaming for him to help me because I couldn't move. And I didn't know that he was paralyzed too. And we both sat up in the bed at the same time. If this is some sort of mental thing that's happening to people, then why aren't they out? Why aren't the scientists or the doctors or whatever trying to find a cure?
Looking for answers, I joined an experiencers group, and I heard a lot of different stories there, but it was atmosphere where people accepted each other's stories. For the most part, it seemed that there was this general consensus that they were all part of a much bigger plan, some cosmic purpose where they were going to receive spiritual enlightenment.
One of the things I've seen happen way too often is that people sometimes even go to the church for help or for answers on this, and because it's such a bizarre topic, pastors often don't know what to do with them or what to say. So the experiencer winds up going to other groups in the secular UFO community, and they say, oh, well, we believe you. Well, we've got people just like you. Come talk at our group. You get a community of acceptance, and you wind up being ambassadors for the entities and their doctrines.
Apollo 14 pilot Dr. Ed Mitchell founded an organization called the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters. They surveyed thousands of contactees and found, among other things, that 80% have had an out-of-body experience. 50% have reported a medical healing by a non-human intelligent being. 83% of experiencers believe that these beings are somehow related to the spirit world. The majority had experienced missing time during their encounter. 85% have undergone a major positive spiritual transformation.
There was one person who claimed to have an alien experience, and this person said before that they were considering becoming a Christian minister. During the experience, they were told that they had been chosen, and it was a life-changing experience for them. As a result, they now embrace these experiences to the extent that it's welcomed several times a week. I was kind of shocked when this person now uses biblical references to support the experience. He tells me that, many are called, but few are chosen. And because he embraces this experience, he now considers himself, or is told by these entities, that he's one of the chosen people to take us all into a higher, lightened type of spirituality.
As a child, Bud Hopkins heard the War of the Worlds radio dramatization, and it left a lasting impression on him. Later, his interest was renewed due to a UFO sighting in 1964, and he subsequently became fascinated by the stories of alien abductions. A self-avowed humanist, Hopkins later wrote 6 books on UFOs and is held in esteem as a pioneer researcher into the abduction phenomenon. His book, Missing Time, a documented study of UFO abductions, is regarded by many as a classic treatise of the subject.
Now, there are all kinds of wonderful stories to illustrate this sort of control that they can have over our perceptions. I was working with a woman once who was recalling an experience. She's on the table inside a ship. There's a physical examination taking place. It's extremely painful, demeaning, and so forth. And she is not only enraged and furious, but she's scared to death and she's undergoing pain. And the head alien, as we know from these accounts, often happens, walks over, puts his hand across her forehead, and she said the pain disappeared. She felt waves of the most profound love she has ever felt in her life. She said she would sacrifice her own children for the love that she felt for this being. It was just beyond anything she had ever known. No pain, no anger, and total love. Now, that kind of manipulation is, of course, something that's part and parcel with the alien means of operating.
I think the stage is set for the appearance of new faiths, centered on the UFO belief, and an idea of the possibility of contact with the cosmic. There are thousands from whom the belief in otherworldly contact is based on intimate conviction, drawn from what they regard as personal contact with UFOs and their occupants.
You wouldn't think that little beings with big black eyes who, when you first look at it, are doing nasty, traumatic, rape-like reproductive experimenting, we don't know it's experimenting, would be the source of mystical openings, as you're suggesting. But in fact, they are psychospiritual opening. It may be that some kind of more intrusive, invasive hit is required, abductions, if you will, to open us up. I mean, that's one of the, it's an intervention in a sense. It's the crossing over of the some beings that should stay in the spirit world coming over into the physical world.
UFO researchers like myself use a set of markers known as the Classic Abduction Syndrome, or the CAS. Now, not everybody has, all 8 experiences. There might only be 2 or 3, but the experiences do follow a pattern. So one can pretty much determine the nature of the experience by using this CAS.
There's a capture. While driving their car at night, they see something, or a strange entity appears in their bedroom. There's an examination. Under hypnosis, they later recall undergoing crude medical examinations aboard a spaceship. There's a conference. They have memories of having a telepathic conference with the aliens, perhaps being told of future events on the Earth. There's a tour. They're given a tour of inside the ship and see strange rooms used for breeding purposes, commonly called incubatoriums. There's an otherworldly journey. They recall being taken to another environment or another planet. There's a theophany. They claim to have met religious leaders or divine beings on the ship, including Jesus Christ. There's a return. When returned to their own environment, they're told to consciously forget their experiences. There's an aftermath. They often have no recollection of the details until they're regressed, but sometimes show physical marks of being interfered with, such as bruises, scratches, or scoop marks where skin has been removed.
For me, the experiences really started with what I would call manifestations. I would have a gray pop its head around a corner and look at me, or one would actually come through a wall, like its face would just manifest out of a wall and look at me and turn around and disappear. It was traumatizing, is probably the best way I can put it. There would be bruises, sometimes on my arms and legs. Occasionally there were cuts on my legs, things that made it very real to me. It was just difficult to try to keep my sanity through the entire thing, really.
One of the main commonalities among the alien abduction experience is that there's always a sexual element to the stories, and I'm afraid including my stories as well. But when I was a child, like 4 or 5 years old, I knew nothing about sex. You know, I couldn't really imagine this stuff. I couldn't make it up. But as I grew older, I began to realize and look back on it, this was really a form of abuse done to me by these entities. So you wind up just keeping this to yourself. You want to talk about it, but you're really all alone. You don't know where to go or who to talk to about it.
You know, it's difficult, and we're often uncomfortable talking about the sexual aspects that experiences undergo. But honestly, I don't think we can ignore the importance of it. And the reason is it's because the intimacy of the experience that they think they have, you know, being violated as well, it has a powerful transforming effect upon the individual. You know, this is nothing new, like many aspects of the UFO phenomenon. You know, experts say that it tailors itself to the culture of the day. Well, think back in the Middle Ages, people recorded similar events with demons known as the incubus and the succubus, and these demons would violate both men and women against their will.
If people ask me, do I think the UFO subject and the phenomenon are dangerous, I actually do. I think if a person has low self-esteem, they're unsure about themselves, they're particularly vulnerable to manipulation and control by the phenomenon. This is something that John Keel very often warned people about. Don't become obsessed by phenomena like UFOs. And invariably, when people do become obsessed, it ends badly.
Psychologist and UFO skeptic Professor Richard McNally from Harvard University noted,
"If you genuinely believe you've been traumatized and recall these memories, you'll show the same psychophysiologic emotional reactions as people who really have been traumatized. Abductees also believe in their experiences so deeply that they display real stress symptoms similar to those of traumatized battlefield veterans."
I remember them coming into our bedroom, and my daughter's crib was at the foot of the bed. And I watched them, 2 of them, come over and pick her up out of her bed. And she was so scared, And I kept screaming at Dan to do something, to stop them. And he couldn't. All we could do was just sit there and watch them. We couldn't move. We couldn't do anything.
One of the most suspicious things about this issue of the phenomenon claiming to be extraterrestrial is that they're constantly coming up with new places or old places from wherever they came. Back in the 50s, it was Mars, it was Venus, it was Saturn. Then in the 60s, we heard stories about Zeta Reticuli. And today, you know, it's multiple star systems all across the universe. Now, we know for sure, or we're pretty sure at least, that Mars and Venus are not homes to massive civilizations of extraterrestrials. Lo and behold, the aliens don't claim to come from Mars or Venus anymore today.
The stories that the alleged abductees have been given all contradict each other, so they can't all be true. Also, they've been given people messages that we can confirm to be lies. Their intent seems to be to deceive people about where they came from.
Now, in 2007, I interviewed a man named Ray Boucher. And in 1991, he was approached by 2 US Department of Defense scientists who were working on a program to contact what they called NHEs, or non-human entities. At first, they thought they were dealing with extraterrestrials. Over time, they found that it was almost as if a dark cloud had fallen on the project. People fell sick, some died, there were very strange runs of bad luck. And they came to believe that what they were dealing with was something literally demonic, but masquerading as extraterrestrial. The reason why they contacted Ray was because of his almost unique background as a MUFON state director and as an active priest. When I interviewed Ray, he was able to share more data, and I was actually able to speak to some of the people involved. And there's no doubt that their conclusions sort of accord with the idea that this is some sort of demonic deception that is highly dangerous, and that there is at least a small elite, if you like, within the government that fully believes that particular theory.
Years ago, we interviewed this man named Bill from rural Florida. He had the stereotypical experience where it starts out late at night, in bed, but prior to that evening, he had seen some lights outside of his living room window.
My dogs were barking very, very loudly in the back, and I'd get up and I'd go over and I'd open up the window, which was next to the bed, and I would tell them to be quiet, and they'd quiet down. I'd go lay down in bed again. They'd start barking again. I did the same thing. I did that several times. I remember the last time that I did it, I went and I lay down, and it was almost instantly I became paralyzed. I could not move. I could not see anything but gray. And all of a sudden it felt like that something or someone had put some pole right up my rectum and was holding me on that pole. And and the entity, or whatever it was that was doing this to me, was laughing like it was pleasurable, or they were laughing at me, and I was so afraid. I didn't know what to do. And I can't remember whether I said, Jesus, 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 or Jesus help me, Jesus help me. But at that instant, my experience stopped. And I distinctly heard these entities squeal in pain. And I hit the bed. I was literally thrown into the bed, which woke my wife up, and she asked me what I was doing jumping on the bed.
The Florida Today newspaper picked up Bill's story that he had stopped his encounter by using the name of Jesus. It got syndicated nationally and triggered a flood of people sharing their experiences with us, that they had halted their experiences in the same way. So I contacted my colleagues in MUFON and other ufologists around the world, and we discovered that many of them knew about this already, but they ignored it because they didn't know what to do with it.
Well, after I got saved and became a Christian, I, of course, revisited my experiences, and I realized that these entities had just altered my worldview, and I'd lived in fear of them coming back for me for most of my adult life. But I realized by using the authority of Christ in me that I don't have to be in fear anymore. And they couldn't harm me and they couldn't take me again. But I did come to the conclusion that these were not benevolent aliens, but they were deceptive evil spirits. So years later, after I actually moved here to Roswell to take this on as a field of ministry, I think the entities actually did try once to mess with me. They came back with a almost tormenting experience, and I just rebuked them in the name of Jesus as it was happening. They've never been able to get a foothold or come after me again since then. And it makes you wonder though, I mean, if these actually are extraterrestrial entities flying millions of light years across space, with that technology, why would they be afraid of the name of Jesus and run from you when you bring him up? I mean, what power does a supposedly dead religious figure have over these entities?
At first, the research was a little confusing. What we were finding was people who professed to be Christians were still having the abduction experience. Looking at it a little deeper, we found that these people were basically intellectually acknowledging the existence of God, but didn't apply it personally. We ended up calling them the talk-the-talk type Christians. But with abductions, we discovered that there seemed to be an absence of devout, Bible-believing, walk-the-walk Christians.
Almost everything I was reading or watching was telling me aliens were what was happening. And what I discovered was, after a couple of years, was some teaching from a Christian perspective that these types of experiences, which are very real, to the especially to the person experiencing them, are actually demonic. What I learned was you can call on the name of Jesus to try to make them stop in the moment. You have to really know the Lord to eventually get the experience to stop completely. Otherwise, it'll just perpetuate.
Well, for example, there was an episode in the Bible, the sons of Sceva, where these Jews, so that is, non-believers, they're not Christians, were going around trying to cast out demons using the name of Jesus. And the scriptures record that the demons replied and said, Jesus we know, Paul we've heard of, who are you? And it records that the demons actually beat them up, so much so that they left naked and bleeding. And what that demonstrates is that it's one thing just to say the name, but you've got to know who Jesus is.
There was another lady in the group who had alien experiences, and she said it was a typical gray that first visited her, that she first saw, and she immediately came to her mind to ask it, "Are you a demon?" And when it answered her, it said, "We know you're Jesus," and then it just vanished.
As a MUFON field investigator, we're trained to do the scientific investigation of UFOs. But in our investigations, we were finding things that we just couldn't get answers for. We were getting reports of crafts that were just utterly defying the laws of physics. We were getting experiencers who were claiming that they were taken through walls and ceilings up to a craft in the sky. These are things that we couldn't really scientifically investigate. So we started investigating to find out what it was about Christians that aliens seemingly didn't like. We came to realize that people weren't having experiences with physical aliens, but instead were having experiences with spiritual beings visiting us from another dimension. This revelation ultimately led to a transformation of our own worldviews.
We can be absolutely sure, after many years of investigation into this phenomenon, that these alleged aliens coming to us from distant star systems are nothing of the sort. Rather, they are deceptive supernatural entities emanating from another dimension.
I didn't start out a Bible-thumping Christian. I was a brand new believer. My colleague working with me was a professing Christian, but I would say that we were both talk-to-talk believers at that time. We were introduced to a Bible study group to be able to educate us onto the history and the aspects of being a Christian. We both took the course. We found out the Bible was the inerrant Word of God. Armed with this new information, we had something that no other UFO researcher could offer, and that was hope. Hope for these people having this horrible experience, that we could help them put an end to it.
But it was Joe Jordan that told me that these things aren't real. I really didn't want to believe him. He gave me testimonies. He gave me all these things to read and look at, and I still didn't want to believe it. I still didn't. But I was on my way home, and I remember pulling up to the stoplight. I knew that it was true. I knew that there was a God, and that the devil was real, and I'd been playing with him for a long time. I called him and told him that I wanted to accept Christ right now. Right now, I didn't want to wait. And I accepted Christ right there in Joe's house.
You know, Christians, we believe that this Bible that we have here is a historical document, that its events were recorded by eyewitnesses and included events that were supernatural both in origin and their reality. We look at this, and the Bible's historical accuracy has been verified by archaeology, by finds that continue to take place. It's never been in any way contested by that. New ones are being found constantly, proving that this is a book that's worthy of our trust.
Jesus, whom the Bible indicates is God in the flesh, submitted himself during his trial before the Roman leader Pontius Pilate and stated, "My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is from another place."
And his disciples noted in 2 Peter 1:16 that we did not follow cleverly invented stories when we told you about the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty.
Now, the Bible tells us that these supernatural visitors throughout the ages are known as angels who are fighting an interdimensional war over the souls of mankind, the very ones that Jesus Christ came to redeem. Now, culturally, when one thinks of angels, our minds are drawn to images of ethereal spirit beings with fairy wings. But that's not how the Scripture records them. When they appear, they often appear physically, can eat, can inflict great harm upon humans in some cases. The Bible also indicates that many of these experiences with spirit beings, sometimes called demons, are deceptive in nature. That's why the Bible's very clear about having nothing to do with them. Unless one has a certain level of discernment about the experience, you are likely to be tricked into believing in something that is not true.
For example, in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 1, it tells us this: "Now the Spirit expressly says that in the latter times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to deceitful spirits and teachings of demons." And in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 3 and 4, "For the time is coming when people will not endure sound teaching, but having itching ears, they will accumulate for themselves teachers to suit their own passions, and will turn away from listening to the truth and wander into myths."
From that point, it was, I'm not just really sure how long it was, 2 or 3 weeks, I'm not sure, that one of the aliens or entities or whatever you want to call them, like morphed through the wall. And then as he got about halfway through the wall, In my mind, I cried, "Help me, Jesus, please help me." And my mouth at that point was moving, I knew that. And the entity looked at me and he said, "I just come to check on you." And I said, "No, never again." And at that point, I had control of my voice, but it only came out in a little mumble. It was like, "Help me, Jesus, help me." And then he was gone. He was gone.
Demonology is not just another crackpotology. It is the ancient and scholarly study of the monsters and demons who have seemingly coexisted with man throughout history. Thousands of books have been written on the subject, many of them authored by educated clergymen, scientists, and scholars. And uncounted numbers of well-documented demonic events are readily available to every researcher.
One of the main reasons why I suspect the phenomenon is not extraterrestrial is because it's constantly changing. If we go back to, say, the Middle Ages in England, we get reports of fairies, of goblins, of little creatures that would abduct people. They would experience missing time. There would be a sexual component to a lot of these cases. And they parallel eerily today's abduction experiences with the so-called greys. So the goalposts are constantly shifting in what the aliens look like. And I think a lot of it reflects our beliefs and our pop culture as to how they manifest for us.
Gary, have you found that there are some types of people who are more prone to these experiences than others?
Yes, and actually I agree with the secular researchers on this, like John Keel and John Mack, Richard McAnally. They discovered there seemed to be an entry point. And, you know, it didn't even have to be a deep involvement in the occult, just an open door. You know, people mess around with the Ouija boards and tarot cards and think it's a lot of fun. Or the more serious ones that dabble in the spirit realm. In my book, I cited some cases where just even a belief in something as seemingly benign as kind of believing that aliens could travel vast distances and visit the Earth could potentially leave one open to deception. And, you know, then, of course, when one has the experience, it just reaffirms what they already believe.
When I look back on things now, I see things a lot differently. We all did, messed around with a Ouija board. I didn't believe in that stuff anyway. But now I realize that each and every one of those different things is an open door, because you don't realize, you don't think that you're doing anything wrong, but they know that you've opened the door and they just kind of sneak right in there, a little step at a time, suck you right in. You're not even going to know you're being sucked in.
After I finally told my parents about what I had experienced as a child, they started sharing with me experiences of their own that they had had. My mom had seen UFOs in person. My dad told me about various experiences of that I'll just call demonic in nature generally. And it started occurring to me that this is definitely a generational experience.
My son and my daughter both had regression sessions, and they started recalling things that had been happening to them throughout their childhoods, growing up, that we didn't know anything about.
Until a person truly puts a stop to it in the name of Jesus Christ and closes any of the door points through media, the occult, whatever, until you actually stop it in the name of Jesus Christ, it can pass on to your children too.
Well, as John Keel discovered, it's just the same old spiritual battle dressed up in a new, believable theme. And so people won't recognize the deception for what it is. And why? I mean, why go to all that trouble? Well, you've got to think about what's at stake, right? If the Bible is true, if the Bible's correct, then what's at stake are the very souls of human beings.
UFOs can project images or fabricated scenes. designed to change our belief systems. Human belief is being controlled and conditioned. Man's concepts are being rearranged, and we may be headed toward a massive change of human attitudes towards paranormal abilities and extraterrestrial life.
Many experiencers also recall being given messages of a religious nature. They are told that they have been specially chosen and that conventional religions are wrong, and that they must enlighten others. There are incredible stories that Jesus was actually a high-tech and advanced alien, and that the Bible authors mistook the technology for miracles.
But we're warned in the New Testament too that evil forces masquerade as angels of light. There's a range of competing isms, religions, and supernatural experiences that one can have. Let's not overcomplicate things here, because there is one motive with all of it, and that is to turn our attention away from the one true source of truth. Even the Apostle Paul in Galatians wrote that if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let him be eternally condemned. Two of the world's largest religions actually started this way. Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, claimed he was given extra biblical revelation by an angel. And Muhammad, the founder of Islam, meditated in a cave for several months and was visited in the same way. And in both cases, we have substitute Bibles.
The most significant thing about UFO encounters is the way in which the witness is radically changed. It's almost like their worldview has altered, as if they're pursuing a new religion, something along those lines.
There have even been replacement gospels written by contactees who now, transformed by their experiences, are ongoing and willing recipients of this new revelation. Like contactee Billy Meyer, who claimed to have unearthed the missing gospel, or one could say a replacement Bible, which was called the Talmud of Emmanuel. And they claim it represents the true life and teachings of Jesus.
You know, you contrast these personal experiences that happened alone, unverifiable, with the massive eyewitness evidence for Jesus Christ, his teaching and his miracles for 3.5 years, that he died on the cross, that he rose from the grave, and then ascended into heaven. This is not just one person's visitor experience story that has no external corroboration like the many alleged abductees who've become really their own religious UFO messiahs today. They may well have had an experience. We don't question that. But it was not from the God of the Bible. He would not contradict what he has already revealed to us.
And unless one starts from the Bible as the source of truth, you won't really have the ability to discern the experience or the phenomenon for what it is. The natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they're folly to him, and he's not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned.
Although they were independent investigators, Gary Bates and Joe Jordan's research intertwined to the point where they've now become collaborators.
So Joe, it's been a couple of years since we caught up, and of course, you know, I've traveled to South Korea to see you now because you are the national director for MUFON here. But you know, the last time we met, you told me that you had dozens and dozens and dozens of testimonies. But what's been happening in these couple of years? Has it still been continuing?
Absolutely, Gary. It doesn't matter where I'm at in this world. These testimonies still reach me through the email, through the website. They just continue to come in. The numbers of testimonies that I'm dealing with now over the past decades, in the hundreds. Testimonies that will show that whether you're singing praise or singing a hymn or going in prayer or calling on the name and authority of Jesus Christ, it stops these horrific experiences.
So, Gary, in your book, you cited a couple of well-known Christian apologists, John Ankerberg, John Weldon, and here's something that they wrote. How credible is it to think that literally thousands of extraterrestrials would fly millions or billions of light years simply to teach New Age philosophy, deny Christianity, and support the occult? Why would they consistently lie about things which we know are true? And why would they purposefully deceive their contacts?
Well, they nailed it.
When we look at the UFO phenomenon, what we find is that the entities involved seem to almost overplay the emphasis that they're extraterrestrials. They go out of their way to stress they're extraterrestrials. Now, there are a number of reasons why the extraterrestrial angle doesn't really hold water. One being that these things, whatever they are, seem very comfortable in our atmosphere, with our oxygen levels. They very rarely are seen with space helmets, so to speak. And this is just too much of a coincidence that entities from millions or thousands of light years away could be so adaptable immediately to our atmosphere. I think we're dealing with beings that are creating a meme to sow the seeds of belief in extraterrestrials when in reality there's something extremely different.
Here's the thing I'd like to say to people. You cannot tell an experiencer that none of this ever happened to them or that some aspects are not real because their mind has already accommodated it as a true memory. I'm not trying to make light of this with what I'm about to say, but if people are really being abducted onto spaceships by extraterrestrials, then out of all of the millions of cases, why didn't they sneak back a towel from the bathroom, a souvenir from, the examination room? Why didn't ET leave something more substantial, in the bedroom like a calling card? The reason is because it's happening in the spiritual realm. It's deceitful. I do most of my speaking in churches, and I take no pleasure in pointing out that the overwhelming majority of Christians, including leaders and pastors, they have no idea that significant numbers of people in their own congregations have possibly seen something or had an experience with strange entities. The reason that this grieves me so much is that the church should be regarded as the obvious place for people to go seeking answers. They're hurting. They've got problems in their lives, and they're looking for comfort and solace, particularly if they're being spiritually affected. This is right in the church's backyard. Christianity has never been more relevant to the culture. If we believe the Bible to be true, my prayer is that we wake up to this spiritual reality that is going on all around us. With science fiction and beliefs in life evolving on other planets, it's not going away.
Because it's one thing to just deny. It's another thing to say, we really understand what you're saying and we believe you had an experience. But here's God's take.
In all the years of my research, I've never come across another name other than Jesus Christ that terminates this experience as a life pattern.
Joe, you know what you just shared there? That's the reason we do what we do, because that conclusive piece of evidence demonstrates that Jesus Christ is the only name, because he's the only one that can have power and authority over these beings that he created. And it's also a great validation of what we believe the Christian faith in the Bible, because it says, there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. And that name is Jesus.
I know it's demonic, and I know it's just something to take me away from God. It's not for me. I'm just more committed than ever and feel the need to try to help other people get set free from this and to see what this is about.
My belief is that the main reason these things happen was really to detract from my belief and faith in God.
We had something that no other UFO researcher could offer, and that was hope. Hope for these people having this horrible experience, that we could help them put an end to it.
I cried, "Help me, Jesus, please help me."
I said, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus," or "Jesus, help me."
I just rebuked them in the name of Jesus as it was happening.
But at that instant, my experience stopped.
And then he was gone. He was gone.
The very idea that older, wiser, and more technologically advanced aliens are visiting the Earth would redefine our traditional view of humankind's place in the universe. However, the serious experts all agree that whatever is behind the UFO phenomenon, it's deceptive and emanating from another realm or dimension. We've just heard another angle, and it seems like the Christian interpretation ideally fits the facts. This traditional view indicates that the most important event in all of human history occurred when the Creator, Jesus Christ, became human. The Bible says, He came to rescue us from these same evil and deceptive forces that gripped this world. And if the Bible is right, then it was this event that most certainly defined our place in the universe.
There's been times whenever I've had that feeling of dread whenever I would go to bed. But all I do is start to pray. And it's gone. It's gone. And I haven't had that for many, many years. And I'm so grateful for him. So grateful.
I want the people in the world to know that they can end these experiences by calling on the name of Jesus. By using the name of Jesus, you're calling on the Creator of this world, of these entities themselves. He can stop. He has the power because it's the name above all names, Jesus Christ.